And from the streets of Whitechapel to the streets of Westminster, Asim Qureshi joins us now. Alan, you're a former Home Secretary. Are the security services too heavy-handed? Are they turning vulnerable young men into jihadists?
No, of course they're not. The policy contest, which has various strands, has one strand, prevent, which is dedicated to ensuring that people don't feel isolated. I mean, this guy had a very expensive university education in this country. I don't think that's trying to...
You mean Nwazi, yeah?
Nwazi. I don't think that's suggesting that he doesn't belong here. And I find it strange, actually, that when all of our efforts should be focused on this distortion of Islam by jihadism, that we're listening to a message that says that somehow we're all guilty of this. Security services in particular, what they should have done, incidentally, and this is Theresa May's great failing, is 3 of those guys, the London boys was the gang, 3 guys with Nwazi, should have been on control orders. They were on control orders and were sent outside of London. It was when control orders were replaced by TPIMs that they were allowed to come back into London, and they colluded in this guy going to Syria. If anything, security forces should have greater powers to deal with these threats, not from the Muslim community, from these, this small minority.
Michael?
Well, I think the interviewing of Nwazi by security officers a few years ago was entirely appropriate. He had behaved in a way that drew attention to himself and made people fear that he was becoming an extremist. The attempt to turn him into an agent was entirely appropriate. It obviously was not successful in his case. It is successful in other cases. And each of us in this room may owe our lives, may owe the fact that we're now alive at the moment to the fact that MI5 have penetrated these organisations and have thwarted a number of bomb plots. Because otherwise, you or I might have been in a shopping centre or in an airport where we might have been machine gunned or might have been blown up. And thank goodness that the security services are turning some of these young men and are doing a good job at penetrating these organisations.
Asim, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all agreed on the fact that we don't want any of our youth committing acts of violence on the streets of London or indeed anywhere else. So I think that's probably the starting point in relation to this. But I think the question we want to ask is, when we've got a number of youth coming to us all the time, saying to us that we're feeling aggrieved, we're feeling like we're being harassed, we're being abused, we're feeling that there's a lot of unnecessary targeting of our communities. We're not saying that the MI5 are making these people into jihadists. What we're saying is that, are we creating an environment here in the UK which is making people feel like they don't belong? So if that is a factor for them leaving, then that's a question we need to ask, and it's a question we need to interrogate. We're not saying for a second that they're turning them into these people. What we're saying, though, is that we want a more socially cohesive society, and part of that is us taking a more empathetic approach to the kind of grievances that these young people have, and not taking a heavy-handed, securitized approach towards them, which is what we're seeing.
You say that, and that all sounds very reasonable, but you encourage them to think what you say they think. I mean, Cage has had a long-running campaign against the security services, deciding to discredit the security services. On your website, you've claimed that UK individuals in Britain are tortured, rendered and killed on the whim of British security agents. Give me one person who's been killed on the whim of a British security agent.
I don't know about that language in particular.
It's what Cage has said.
But
you've claimed that people in Britain are jailed without due process. Who's in jail today in Britain without due process?
Well, we would say that a number of people were. We had a number of men who were held in detention without charge for, over a decade in the UK.
Who's in jail today without due process?
Currently, we would say no one, because a lot of the people that came off their deportation orders, were actually deported or were extradited. So those kinds of cases no longer exist.
And nobody's been killed on the whim of a security agent.
We feel that there are certain questions to be asked in terms of individuals who were killed by drone strikes in Somalia. So that's quite important that we
but you say UK. No, but on your website you say UK individuals are tortured, rendered, killed on the whim of British security agents. Well, give me a name.
Well, we know Mazen Beg, Binyan Mohammed al-Habashi, but we're making a wider point here about the way in which our security services operate. Let me just explain myself a little bit better here, which is that what we're asking for, is that there should be at least a degree of accountability where our security agencies have been involved in wrongdoing. We're not asking for anything unreasonable. We're not saying that they're evil people. What we're saying, though, is that when you have a cycle of violence, when you have a cycle of abuse where one side, and there's a barbarization of warfare taking place, when we as British people, we move away from our values of due process, of the rule against torture, of the right to a fair trial, then what we do is that we actually start entering into that cycle of violence, that cycle of barbarization. What we want to say is send a very clear message that we never will accept this type of behavior. Look at the orange jumpsuits that ISIS are using right now. Those orange jumpsuits come out of only one place, which is Guantanamo Bay. We're saying if we stop things like Guantanamo Bay, if we stop these abuses, if we establish a moral authority about the way that we behave in the Western world, then that sends the strongest message possible that these type of things are completely unacceptable, and we reclaim that moral authority.
But you're part of this cycle of violence. You've supported Jihad, you supported suicide bombers, your organisation has close association with all manner of extremist groups. Taqiya, for example, your organisation very close to a senior Al-Qaeda terrorist in charge, Anwar al-Awlaki. You've been part of all that.
All of the people that we represent, even those people we completely disagree with, and I disagree with many of Anwar al-Awlaki's opinions, especially after his period of detention.
You called him an inspiration.
And at one time he was.
He was a terrorist.
Later on in life. You see, this is the point.
You called for jihad.
Absolutely I do. What do we mean by jihad? We mean self-defense. We mean the right to self-defense. And when I talk about self-defense, I talk also about when I read the accounts and I see what happened on September 11th, I completely understand why it is that America would want to defend itself and attack. But what we say is that everything has to be proportional, and even jihad has to be proportional. Look, we want our youth to grow up in the UK knowing what their rights and obligations are. Jihad is part of the religion of Islam. If we don't teach it correctly, then what's going to happen is
you weren't teaching it correctly outside the American embassy in 2006. You were a firebrand preacher that day.
No,
you were encouraging support for jihad.
Yeah, there's a lot of emotion that
for
goes
violence
in demonstration. There's a lot of emotion that comes out. Okay.
Well, that doesn't excuse it.
And everyone who was at that demonstration would know instantly that Asim Qureshi and Cage are people who do not advocate terrorism in any way.
Excuse me,
we advocate...
The protest was organised by Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is one of the most extremist groups in the country.
Which is a non-violent organisation. We're not members of Hizb ut-Tahrir, but we support their right to make their political opinions. And this is the point that, look, if you're going to shut down organisations like Hizb ut-Tahrir, if you're going to call for that, then basically what
do you deny it's an extremist organisation?
Yeah, I would say it's not an extremist.
All right, well, I want one more question, then I'm going to bring in Alan and Michael again. Your spiritual mentor and guide is Hatim al-Haddad, and you've been close to him in the past, correct?
He's one scholar in the UK that I think has an important
You've taken mentoring and guidance from it. He believes the following, that female genital mutilation is not only acceptable, it's probably obligatory, that you should not question a man's right to hit his wife, that non-Muslim prisoners can be taken as slaves, that Jews are descendants of pigs, that death by stoning is okay for adultery, and that homosexuality is a crime against humanity. Have you been guided to believe that too?
I mean, I've never been guided to believe any of those things.
Do you believe any of that?
I'm not a theologian. I can't.
No, I'm not asking you a theologian. I'm asking if you believe any of that.
I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about in relation to that.
Well, you've said that. You've said that under the proper Sharia law process, that you would support the death penalty. Correct?
Actually, it's interesting you talk about that, because one of the things that actually came out of that interview that I did with Julian Assange was a lot of criticism by scholars who said to me, why are you talking about issues you know nothing about? I'm not a theologian.
Well, you said you supported the death penalty.
I'm not a theologian at all.
But you don't have to be a theologian to have a view on the death penalty. And it implied that under a proper Sharia law process, you would support death by stoning, would you?
I do a lot of work actually against the death penalty.
Would you?
What I'm about, and
you
what
said
my
to Julian
organisation
Assange you supported it.
Is due process of the law. Okay, and that is what the point that I was trying to make with that answer was to talk about due process. That's a very, very important thing as far as we're concerned. When you don't have...
But after we've had due process, under a sharia law system, would you support stoning?
As far as I'm concerned, the sharia law isn't practiced anywhere in the world. You have to give me an example of where sharia law is being practiced correctly.
That's a weasel answer, isn't it?
It's not a weasel answer.
It's a simple question.
No,
if you had due process under sharia law, would you support stoning for adultery? It's a simple question.
You see, Andrew, what we're talking about here, okay, is how counter-terrorism policy is affecting our youth here in the UK. What you've done, okay, is that you're trying to conflate, you know, kind of issues within Islam as kind of theological issues within Islam with what we're talking about. But the thing
what I'm trying to find out is whether you are putting up a moderate front and behind it hangs a jihadist agenda. That's what I've been asking you, but you won't answer my questions.
No, what we're saying, okay, is that you cannot simply conflate issues of theology and religion with violence on the streets of London, which is exactly what you were trying to do.
I think most people regard stoning for adultery as not an issue of theology, but a matter of civilization. What do you make of what you've heard? Alan first.
Oh, well, this is what we're up against in terms of the moderate front. I mean, you know, I'd like to ask one question. I mean, do you believe Mwazi was in Tanzania on safari in 2009? You must be the only person in the world.
That's what he told me, and nobody has provided me any evidence to the contrary.
On safari, he was there on safari. So the security forces shouldn't have questioned him because he was generally going on safari.
Why would he bother getting engaged, setting up a job for himself in Kuwait, and doing all of that if he was simply going to get himself killed?
And the security forces shouldn't have questioned him.
No, I never said the security forces.
Okay, let me get a final point.
I said that they shouldn't have stopped him. They shouldn't have broken off his engagement. They shouldn't have stopped him from getting a job up there. I wonder what might have happened if he went to Kuwait.
Final point from Michael.
I think it's worth remembering what Mwazi has done. I mean,
absolutely,
he's beheaded. He's beheaded people. I mean, as it happens, these people were the most innocent people you can imagine. They were journalists, they were aid workers.
I agree with that entirely.
It was absolutely diabolical. I think Asim, despite all his cleverness, comes over as an apologist for Mwazi.
That's not true.
And I haven't been able to turn on the BBC all week without hearing you and seeing you. And I just wonder what the hell the BBC is doing, giving you all this airtime.
That is nonsense.
I really don't know what the BBC is doing, giving you all this airtime. And I'll tell you why I think it's so unfortunate. Because I think so many people are going to think that you are an apologist for Mwazi.
But I'm telling you now,
and I think that is desperate for community relations.
Are you suggesting that I'm lying?
Final words.
I'm telling you now, okay, that I feel very, very bitter about what has become to this young man. If Jihadi John is Mwazi, then how could any human being condone that behaviour? It's terrible. It should never happen. And I'm unequivocally saying right now that we have to stop those types of executions, because it's exactly that type of action that we are condemning in Guantanamo Bay and elsewhere. And we don't want our Muslim people to be doing that. That is no way to behave.
We have to stop there. You got the last word. Thank you for being with us.